She was an old woman accused of burning down the very garden she built with her bare hands. Neighbors turned away, doors slammed shut, and the court treated her like trash. In the courtroom, Rosa Bennett stood trembling, clutching nothing but her dignity, while her little grandson watched, helpless. No lawyer, no money, no hope. Just silence. But then out of nowhere the boy rose from his chair. With a torn folder pressed to his chest, he walked to the front. His voice shook, but his words cut sharper than any lawyer's. And that single moment changed everything. Why must a child fight for justice adults refused to see? The boy in the shadows. It was a rainy morning in downtown Chicago when 9-year-old Elijah Bennett adjusted the collar of his hand-me-down blazer and stepped through the cold revolving doors of the Cook County Courthouse. His sneakers squeaked on the polished floor, drawing a few stares from security guards and lawyers bustling between courtrooms. The courtroom where his grandmother, Rosa Bennett, stood trial smelled like dust and old wood. Elijah sat quietly in the back row, feet not touching the ground, clutching a frayed backpack filled with crumpled documents, handwritten notes, and a tablet that barely held a charge. The Judge Honorable Madeline Chen presided with poise. Her reputation for no-nonsense rulings made her feared and respected across the city. Today she looked down at the frail woman sitting silently at the defense table. Rosa, 69, a retired social worker and longtime community gardener now accused of arson and insurance fraud. Her community greenhouse had burned to the ground 3 months ago, and the $250,000 insurance payout had sparked an investigation. Rosa's court-appointed lawyer had withdrawn the day before, citing irreconcilable conflicts. She had no one left to speak for her, except Elijah. As the prosecutor finished his opening argument, laced with legal jargon and disdain, Elijah rose, quietly walked past rows of adults, and approached the bench. "Your Honor," he said, standing barely as tall as the podium, "I'd like to speak on behalf of my grandmother." A hush fell over the courtroom. Judge Chen blinked, removing her glasses. "Young man, are you part of the legal team?" "No, ma'am. But she doesn't have one anymore." "You should be in school," the judge said gently, though curiosity sparked in her tone. "I will go back tomorrow. But today I need to tell the truth, because I know who really started that fire. And it wasn't my grandma." The gallery shifted, murmurs rising. "Please," he added, "just give me 10 minutes. If I can't prove anything, I'll leave." Judge Chen looked to the prosecutor, a slick-haired man named Peter Calloway, who rolled his eyes. "This is highly irregular," Calloway grumbled. "Objection noted," Judge Chen said, then turned to Elijah. "You may proceed, but you are not acting as legal counsel. You are a witness. Understand?" Elijah nodded. "Yes, ma'am." He unzipped his bag with trembling fingers and pulled out a folder labeled in blue crayon evidence, "The Real Fire Starter." Flashback. 3 months earlier, the Green Loop Garden was Rosa's life work. Tucked between 2 abandoned lots in Southside Chicago, it had once been a haven for kids, veterans, and elderly immigrants alike. Tomatoes, squash, and sunflowers bloomed where broken glass once glinted. Elijah had spent every summer afternoon there since his parents' death 2 years ago. That night, the greenhouse exploded into flames. The next day, Rosa was arrested based on a single report from a neighbor who claimed she'd overheard Rosa say she was done fighting city permits. The insurance company pounced. The police found no clear surveillance. And when Rosa refused to take a plea deal out of pride, Calloway built a case accusing her of burning her own life's work for the money. But Elijah had seen something that night, and no one had asked him. Until now. Smoke and silence. The courtroom was still. Judge Chen leaned forward slightly as Elijah opened his folder with surprising precision. Inside were photographs printed on school paper receipts and sketches of the greenhouse's layout labeled in his own careful handwriting. "I go to the garden every day after school," Elijah began. "That day I got there around 4:30, and I saw something weird. A man in a green jumpsuit, not someone I'd ever seen before, was messing with the side door to the tool shed. He had a clipboard and gloves." Calloway smirked. "With respect, Your Honor, we're listening to a child's fantasy." Judge Chen raised a hand. "Let him speak. I'll decide what's fantasy." Elijah held up a sketch of the garden. "This is the door. It's normally locked, but I saw him jimmying it with something. I hid behind the compost bin and took a picture before he left." He handed the judge a photo printed from a cheap inkjet, grainy, but clear enough to show a man's profile and the letters GLI on the jumpsuit sleeve. "GLI?" the judge asked. "Green Loop Landscaping, Inc., Elijah said. "They're the city's contracted maintenance group." Calloway straightened in his chair. Judge Chen glanced at him. "Did your office interview Green Loop?" "They were mentioned but not formally deposed. The cause of the fire was determined as accelerant-related. It matched material found in Ms. Bennett's tool shed." "But not fingerprints," Elijah said. Calloway's eyes narrowed. Elijah took a breath. "My grandma wears gloves when she gardens. Thick ones. And I found something else." He held up a tattered plastic bag containing a partially melted bottle, labeled G2 Igniter. "I found this under the shed where the floorboards were broken after the fire. It was lodged under the dirt and wrapped in the city's inspection flag. Like someone dropped it rushing out." "Where did you get this?" Calloway snapped. "From the garden." 2 days after the fire, no one checked the southeast corner. Judge Chen looked to the bailiff. "Bag that for evidence analysis." Elijah turned a page in his folder. "Also, this is the permit my grandma got denied 2 weeks before the fire." He held up a city form marked "Rejected" with scribbled notes about zoning violations. "And this," he added, "is a receipt from Green Loop Landscaping charging $2,100 for emergency tree removal from the site. 2 days before the fire. Except we didn't have any trees removed. Grandma said it was a billing error. But I think it's a fake invoice." He placed the papers on the table. The room had changed. What started as a courtroom novelty was shifting into an actual investigation. And Elijah had more. Flashback 2 weeks before the fire, Elijah had sat at Rosa's tiny kitchen table watching her work through receipts with her bifocals. She muttered about zoning laws and city permits. "It's like they want us to fail," she'd said. "Every time we make progress, they push us back." "Can I help?" Elijah had asked. "Only if you know how to read city council contracts," she replied, smiling. "I can try." It became their ritual, comparing numbers, organizing folders. Rosa taught him how to detect duplicate billing, how to match vendor codes to addresses. For Elijah, it was more than bonding. It was the only time he felt useful since his parents' accident. He didn't know then that his obsession would soon become her lifeline. Back in court, Calloway stood flustered. "This proves nothing," he argued. "The Green Loop employee wasn't identified. And we can't verify the photo's timestamp." Elijah didn't flinch. "That's why I asked someone to help." He pointed to the gallery where a woman stood, a tall figure in a gray cardigan with sharp eyes. "This is Miss Adrian," Elijah said. "She's a digital forensics professor at the University of Illinois. She helped me extract the original metadata from the photo and timestamp it." Adrian nodded. The image was taken at 4:47 p.m., 2 hours before the fire. The device's GPS matches the garden's coordinates. Judge Chen raised an eyebrow. Elijah turned back to the bench. "Your Honor, I'm only a kid, but I know what I saw. And I know my grandma didn't do this. She cried for days, not because they arrested her, but because she lost the garden. It was the only thing she had left." Rosa lowered her head, hands trembling in her lap. The judge looked between the evidence and the boy. "This court will recess for the afternoon," she said. "I will review the new materials thoroughly." Elijah sat down, finally exhaling. And somewhere in the back row, someone began to clap quietly at first, then joined by others. Calloway stormed out, jaw tight. The city, it seemed, had underestimated the quietest voice in the room. The system pushes back. After the courtroom recessed, Elijah sat on the marble courthouse steps with his legs crossed, sipping warm juice from a paper cup that a kind paralegal had handed him. The wind whipped at his jacket, but he didn't mind. His heart was still racing. Inside the building, the grown-ups were panicking. Miss Adrian knelt beside him. "You did something powerful today," she said, her voice steady. "You made them listen." Elijah looked down. "Do you think the judge believes me? She believes in the facts," Adrian said. "And you gave her real ones. But not everyone was impressed." Back upstairs, Prosecutor Calloway paced his office, red-faced and fuming. His assistant stood awkwardly by the door. "This kid is unraveling my entire case," he snapped. "Where was the Green Loop invoice in discovery? It wasn't flagged, sir. The fire inspector's report focused on internal ignition sources. I want that forensics professor investigated. Who approved her testimony?" "No one. She didn't testify under oath." Calloway slammed his fist against the desk. "Then we discredit her." "But sir, what if she's right?" Calloway stopped, slowly turning toward his assistant. "Do you want to work traffic court for the rest of your life?" The assistant backed down. "No, sir." "Good. Find me something on Rosa Bennett. Anything. Old tax issues, protest records, complaints. She's a community hero." "Fine. Let's see if she ever jaywalked." He picked up his phone. "Call the fire marshal's office. I want new testimony that confirms the original ignition theory. I don't care if it's weak, just make it sound scientific." What Elijah didn't yet know was that truth, even when clear, must still battle fear, pride, and politics. The next morning, court resumed with an air of tension. Word had spread. A local news camera was spotted outside. Rosa had become more than just a defendant. She was now the face of a flawed system being challenged by a child. Judge Chen entered composed as ever. "We will now hear rebuttal from the prosecution," she announced. Calloway stood face calm, but voice tight. "Your Honor, in light of yesterday's unexpected testimony, I would like to present additional witness analysis from Fire Inspector Neil Simmons." A gray-haired man stepped up. He looked nervous. "Mr. Simmons," Calloway said smoothly. "Did your original report determine an accelerant in the tool shed?" "Yes." "And would that accelerant have ignited with sufficient oxygen and spark?" "Yes." "And based on the shed's access, who was the only known key holder?" "Ms. Rosa Bennett." Calloway turned to the judge, triumphant. "Nothing introduced yesterday disproves that simple fact." Elijah stood again. "Your Honor, may I ask the witness a question?" Judge Chen glanced at Calloway, who scoffed, then gave a reluctant nod. "You may," she said carefully. Elijah walked slowly to the front. "Mr. Simmons, were you aware that 2 other volunteers had access to the garden that week?" "No. That wasn't on the incident report." "Did you test the garden's entry logs?" "We didn't have a digital lock. But there was a sign-in book at the gate, right?" "Yes." Elijah held up a photo of the gate log page, scanned by Miss Adrian. "This shows that on the morning of the fire, a man named Lester C. signed in. He used a maintenance badge number." "Lester Chambers," Simmons murmured. "That's a GLI contractor." "And did you ever interview him?" Elijah asked. Simmons hesitated. "No." "Did you test the shed for his fingerprints?" "No." "And was there any reason you assumed Miss Bennett's key was the only one we were told by the insurer?" Objection, Calloway barked. "This is cross-examination, not testimony." Judge Chen raised a hand. "Overruled." "Mr. Simmons, please answer. I was told Ms. Bennett had exclusive access." Elijah nodded. "Thank you, sir." He turned back toward the jury. "My grandma didn't do this. Someone else had motive. She had a fight with the city about permits. But so did the contractors because the garden was supposed to go public next year, and they'd lose their private maintenance contract." He pointed to Calloway. "And maybe other people wanted this case to be closed fast because reopening it would be inconvenient." Calloway turned red. The jury murmured again. That afternoon, back in chambers, Judge Chen reviewed the transcripts. Her notes were messy rare for her, but the case was evolving in ways she didn't expect. A child had exposed procedural oversights, poor investigation, and a prosecutor more interested in conviction than truth. She looked at Rosa's file. No criminal record. Years of volunteer work. Over 100 signed testimonials from community members. But the most compelling piece: the photo of a boy in a blazer holding a folder that simply read, "Justice for Grandma." The power of a voice. It was pouring outside when Elijah returned to court the next day, his tiny umbrella barely protecting his head. His backpack was heavier than usual, not because of the folders, but because of what he now carried: the responsibility of hope. Inside the courtroom, the energy was electric. More journalists had shown up. A social justice podcast had picked up the story overnight, and trending hashtags were calling Elijah the boy who outsmarted the system. Elijah hated the attention. He just wanted his grandma back. Rosa was quiet that morning. Her eyes, usually bright, were sunken and tired. "You shouldn't have to do this," she whispered to Elijah before the session began. He gently touched her hand. "I'm doing it because you shouldn't have to be alone." In court, Calloway tried once again to wrestle back control of the narrative. He called a city accountant to testify about Rosa's insurance claim. The accountant droned on about payouts, procedural anomalies, and flags in Rosa's submission. But the damage was done. The jurors were no longer listening the same way. They were watching Calloway closely, too closely. When cross-examination opened, Elijah asked to speak again. This time even Calloway didn't object. It was too late. He walked up with a receipt in hand. "Sir, did Ms. Bennett file her claim within the legal 30-day window?" The accountant flipped through papers. "Yes." "And did she receive confirmation that her claim was being processed?" "Yes." "Then why did the insurance company freeze the payout 5 days later without explanation?" "That's unclear, possibly based on the police report. But no arson report was filed at that time." The accountant blinked. Elijah lifted another page. This is a memo from the garden board, written before the fire. It shows Ms. Bennett had been pushing to convert the privately held land into a community-owned trust. That would void several subcontractor contracts worth nearly $300,000. He paused, looking at each juror. "That's motive." Calloway stood face twitching. "That memo was not submitted as admissible evidence," Judge Chen interrupted him. "Mr. Calloway, sit down." The courtroom murmured. Even the stenographer struggled to keep up. Later that afternoon, a woman stepped into the witness box. Her name was Cynthia Monroe, a former intern at the local zoning office. She wore a modest gray sweater and looked uncomfortable. "I wasn't going to speak," she said nervously. "But when I saw the boy, I had to." Elijah looked up in surprise. "I was told to delete records of contractor complaints linked to Green Loop Landscaping. I saved them. I still have copies. One of them is a formal warning about fire code violations involving storage of fuel near dry compost at the garden site." The room gasped. "And one more thing," Cynthia added, voice trembling. "A week before the fire, someone from the district attorney's office called my boss and said to close the Bennett case, fast and clean. He wrote it in his planner. I saw it." Calloway stood up. "This is hearsay and slander. Then call my old boss, Cynthia said. He'll lie, but I won't. She stepped down, and the air seemed to change. It was no longer Rosa on trial. It was the system itself. Back at home that night, Elijah sat with Rosa at their small table surrounded by folders and tea mugs. She squeezed his hand. I don't care what happens in that court, she said softly. You've already won, Elijah. You made them see me. He frowned. I don't want them to just see you. I want them to say they were wrong. You're stronger than I ever was, Rosa whispered. You're going to change the world. He didn't believe that yet. He just wanted her to be free. The next day, Judge Chen entered the courtroom slowly. The murmurs stopped. She took a long pause before speaking. In the matter of the state of Illinois versus Rosa Bennett, this court finds the defendant she looked at Elijah to have been misrepresented, poorly investigated, and maliciously targeted. She turned to Rosa. All charges are dismissed effective immediately. Gasps broke out. Calloway sat in stunned silence. Rosa covered her face and wept. Elijah dropped his backpack and ran to her. Cheers filled the courtroom as Judge Chen banged her gavel, once then said the words that would echo across Chicago for months. Sometimes the smallest voice carries the deepest truth. After the gavel falls. The applause still rang in Elijah's ears as he walked with Rosa down the courthouse steps into the gray afternoon light. Dozens of strangers lined the sidewalk, cheering, holding signs that read things like, "Justice for Rosa Believe Kids" and "Truth Has No Age." But Elijah wasn't thinking about the cameras or the chants. He was thinking about the way Rosa squeezed his hand tighter than ever before, as if she finally felt safe. Reporters swarmed them, microphones thrust forward. Elijah, did you ever think you'd win, Miss Rosa? How do you feel about being exonerated? What's next for you both? Elijah looked up at Rosa. We're going home, she said gently, shielding him from the crowd. That's what's next. That evening, their apartment was lit only by soft lamplight and the glow of the small TV in the corner. Rosa made soup. Elijah sat at the table poring over his now iconic folder, trying to reorganize the papers he'd scattered in court. He turned to Rosa. Grandma, do you think they'll fix it? Fix what, baby? The system? The way they believed you were guilty before they even asked questions? Rosa sat down beside him. I don't know. But I do know one thing, what they'll think twice next time because of you. Elijah looked down. I just wanted them to see what I saw, that you never lied, that you loved that garden more than money, that you love people. I love you more than all of it, she said, kissing his forehead. Meanwhile, across town, Calloway sat alone in his office. The blinds were drawn, the lights off. His assistant had quit that morning. The mayor's office had requested a full review of every case he prosecuted in the last 5 years. An internal investigation was underway. But worst of all, he couldn't stop seeing that boy's face, calm, determined, unafraid. He thought about what he'd said on the courthouse phone, thinking no one would ever hear it. She's old. Poor. The jury won't care. Let's close it fast. He knew now someone had cared. 1 week later, Rosa received a letter in the mail. It was from Judge Chen. Handwritten. Dear Ms. Bennett, your grandson reminded me why I wear this robe, not to intimidate, not to condemn, but to protect. He exposed a truth we too often forget in the justice system, that sometimes those who speak softly carry the most devastating truths. I've begun pushing for reforms in prosecutorial review procedures and city contractor audits. Change is coming. With respect, Honor. Madeline Chen Rosa folded the letter slowly. She tucked it into the back of Elijah's folder and wept again, but this time with relief. 1 month later, Elijah stood nervously at the podium of PS 73's auditorium. It was career day. Most kids talked about wanting to be astronauts, football players, or YouTubers. When it was his turn, Elijah walked up holding nothing but his truth. "I want to be someone who listens," he said. The room was quiet. Because if someone had listened when Grandma said she didn't do it, she wouldn't have needed me to prove it. A girl in the second row clapped first. Then everyone joined, and somewhere in the back, Miss Adrian wiped a tear from her cheek. Back in court, Judge Chen kept a framed photo of Elijah and Rosa on her desk now. Beneath it, a quote was engraved, "Truth doesn't need volume, just courage." She looked at it often, especially before ruling on cases that didn't feel quite right. Because once she'd almost ignored a child. And that child had reminded her what justice truly meant. The garden reborn spring arrived in Chicago with a strange sense of redemption. The snow finally melted, and the city began to thaw, both literally and metaphorically. And on a small piece of reclaimed land on South Side's Edgewater block, Rosa Bennett stood in boots and gloves, once again digging her hands into the soil she once thought she'd never see again. The Green Loop Garden had been rebuilt this time, with community donations, college volunteer labor, and more visibility than ever. A local nonprofit had provided new materials, and Rosa had been invited to speak at the opening ceremony. But it wasn't Rosa who spoke that day. It was Elijah. At the garden opening, microphones crackled. Folding chairs lined the rows. The mayor's representative sat on one end, reporters and community members on the other. Elijah, wearing a blue sweater and clean shoes, stepped up to the small podium. He glanced down at his notes, then looked out at the crowd. "I used to come here every day after school," he began. "Before the fire, before the courthouse, before the shouting." People quieted. This place wasn't just a garden. It was my grandma's soul. She planted seeds not just in the ground, but in people. He paused, looked at Rosa. They tried to take that away. But truth grows back. A gentle breeze swept through the tulips, and now he added, "This garden will belong to the people, not the city, and no one will burn it down again." The crowd rose in applause. Rosa had to sit down to keep from falling over with emotion. Later that day, Elijah walked the perimeter of the new fence, watching the kids dig holes for sunflowers. One of them, a smaller boy, ran over. "You're that kid from the court video, right? The smart one?" Elijah nodded shyly. "Yeah, I guess." The boy looked impressed. "Do you think I could help here sometime?" Elijah smiled. "Anyone can help." Then, without thinking, he reached into his backpack and pulled out a spare notebook labeled Community Ideas. "Want to write your name on the first page?" The boy nodded eagerly. It wasn't just a garden anymore. It was a movement. Meanwhile, across the city, Callaway resigned under public pressure. The Attorney General launched a formal investigation into misconduct in 3 other high-profile cases. One was overturned within weeks. A new initiative dubbed the Elijah Clause was introduced into local legislation. It mandated third-party reviews of community-based arson cases and enforced greater transparency in prosecutorial conduct. Judge Chen personally endorsed it. Rosa gave testimony. Elijah received a letter from the city council thanking him for his unintentional activism. But Elijah didn't want to be an activist. He just wanted people to think before accusing. Back at home. That night, Elijah curled up on the couch, his head resting on Rosa's lap. She stroked his hair while the evening news played in the background, reporting on the newly reopened city cases. "You've made something bigger than both of us," she whispered. "I didn't mean to," he mumbled sleepily. "I just wanted you to be okay." Rosa smiled. That's how all the best changes start. She pulled a soft blanket over his shoulders as the camera on the TV panned across the new garden. In the distance, you could see a small wooden sign, newly painted Elijah's Corner, where truth takes root. New roots, new roads. By late summer, the story of Elijah Bennett and Rosa's garden had spread beyond Chicago. National newspapers featured headlines like "9-year-old uncovers corruption in city garden scandal," "The boy who spoke truth in a courtroom of grown-ups, justice grows in Elijah's garden." Rosa had become something of a local legend, invited to speak at public housing panels and nonprofit forums. She remained humble, often redirecting praise to her grandson. "Elijah's the miracle," she'd say. "I just raised the soil he grew in." But not everyone was celebrating. In the background, quiet threats. 2 anonymous letters had arrived at Rosa's door within a month. Handwritten, unsigned. "Drop the interviews. You got your garden. Don't push your luck." The second letter was clearer. "The past isn't done with you. Don't make enemies you can't see." Rosa didn't tell Elijah. She didn't want him afraid. But Miss Adrian noticed the tension. When Rosa missed a scheduled panel, she visited the house directly. "Rosa," she said, gripping her hand, "we can arrange protection if you need it." Rosa shook her head. "No. That's what they want, to make me look afraid or paranoid. I'm not giving them the satisfaction." But the truth was, she hadn't slept in days. Elijah finds out. One evening, Elijah noticed a piece of torn envelope in the trash. He pulled it out, then found the note in the drawer. He read it in silence, heart pounding. He stormed into Rosa's room, eyes wide. "Why didn't you tell me?" Rosa turned, surprised. "Elijah, you always say the truth protects us. Why are you hiding it now?" Her face softened. "I was trying to protect you." Elijah sat on the bed beside her. "I don't want to live protected. I want to live prepared." It was the first time Rosa realized just how much her grandson had grown. Next day, escalation. That morning, someone slashed the tires on Rosa's donated greenhouse truck. A rock was thrown through the garden's shed window. No security footage again. This time they filed a report. The mayor's office sent staff. Local police increased patrols. But the message had been sent. Someone didn't like what they represented. Elijah makes a choice. That night, Elijah wrote a speech. Not for school, not for court, for the people. At the next community forum, hosted at the Southside Civic Center, he asked to speak last. Adults debated budgets and policies. But when Elijah stepped up, the room quieted. He placed a printed version of the threat letters on the podium. "My grandma didn't burn anything," he said. "But someone still wants her afraid." He looked up. "That's how you know we're doing something right." The room clapped once, then again, then louder. Elijah continued. "You can't scare truth out of the soil. You can't silence people who already lost everything once." He looked directly into the cameras covering the forum. "We're not going anywhere." That speech was broadcast locally and then nationally. The threats stopped. The city quietly removed 2 contracted maintenance executives after a private audit. Rosa never found out who sent the letters. But she knew one thing they had lost. Because her grandson wasn't afraid of shadows anymore. Full circle fall arrived, and with it came golden leaves, cooler air, and invitations, lots of them. One was from the University of Chicago's law school, inviting Rosa and Elijah to be guest speakers at a symposium titled "Justice from the Ground Up." Another was from the governor's office requesting a meeting to discuss reforms on how community-based evidence is considered in court proceedings. But the most surprising letter came in a plain white envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. "You were right. I was wrong. I wish I'd listened sooner. I no longer have a career, but at least I still have my conscience. Peter Calloway." Rosa read the letter once, then again. She said nothing, just quietly slid it into the back of Elijah's folder. When he asked what it was, she smiled faintly. "Just someone trying to plant their own truth," she said, "at the university symposium." The room was packed: law students, professors, even 2 federal judges. Rosa wore her best church dress. Elijah wore the same blazer he had worn to court months ago, though it fit a little tighter now. They stood side by side at the podium. Rosa spoke first. "I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a public figure. I'm a gardener," she began. "But I've learned something: injustice is like rot. It starts in silence in dark places. But sunlight changes everything." Then Elijah stepped forward. "I've been asked if I want to be a lawyer," he said. "Maybe. But more than that, I want to be someone who listens to the people no one else hears, because that's where the truth usually is." He held up his old folder, now worn and taped. "This is what changed everything. Not the system, not the suits, just this folder, and the belief that I was allowed to speak." The room erupted in applause. 1 year later, Elijah was now 10 and taller. Rosa's garden had expanded into 2 new lots. A volunteer group helped her set up a community composting program and water harvesting system. Local schools sent students for weekly service hours. The new garden sign read, "The Bennett Garden." Where truth grows, beneath it was a plaque founded by Rosa and Elijah Bennett, rebuilt by a community that finally listened. Elijah's folder had been scanned and archived by the city's legal records department. It now sat in a museum exhibit titled "Voices of Justice: Kids Who Changed Law." On the porch that night, Elijah and Rosa rocked in their chairs. "Did you ever think Elijah asked we'd get all this back?" Rosa looked at the stars. "No, baby. I thought we lost it forever. But we didn't. No. You didn't let us." Elijah looked down at his lap. "I was scared, you know." "I know. But I didn't want to lose you too." Rosa reached over and held his hand. "That's what love is, Elijah. Being brave even when you're scared." They sat in silence, the stars blinking above. The world had changed, but only because they made it. Legacy in bloom. It had been 2 years since Rosa stood trial. In that time, Elijah had grown another 4 inches. His backpack was heavier with science books now, but he still carried that same weathered folder. Not because he needed it, but because it reminded him of the moment he discovered who he truly was. The Bennett Garden had been designated a model urban renewal site by the state of Illinois. A plaque from the governor himself now stood beside the compost barrels. Students came from out of state just to visit the garden that had started as a legal battleground and became a sanctuary. Rosa, now 71, had been officially named Community Guardian of the Year, but she turned down every major press interview. "I've already said everything that mattered," she told Elijah. "And besides, your voice matters more now." One afternoon, Elijah stood before a group of 6th graders from a nearby school who had come for a field trip. He walked them through the rows of tomatoes and spinach, explaining how rainwater was collected, how soil was rotated, and how compost worked. One boy raised his hand. "Did you really beat a lawyer in court?" Elijah smiled. "I didn't beat anyone. I just asked the questions no one else thought to ask." "Are you going to be president?" another girl asked. He laughed. "No, I think I'd rather build things than run them. Like gardens." "Like gardens?" He nodded. "And maybe laws, too." Later that week, at City Hall, Rosa and Elijah were invited to a special event, the signing of a new city ordinance called the Community Voice Protection Act, nicknamed the Bennett Clause. It ensured that any community evidence photographs, personal logs, audio, and even oral testimonies must be reviewed in pre-trial hearings, regardless of the witness's age or education. Elijah didn't fully understand all the language, but he understood this. It meant no one like Grandma Rosa would be ignored again, back at home. That evening, Elijah added a final tab to his folder, now worn soft from time and handling. The label read, "We won." Rosa passed him a warm mug of cocoa. Still carrying that old thing around, she teased. "I don't think I'll ever stop. You should frame it someday." He looked out the window where a new generation of kids ran through the garden rows, laughing and chasing fireflies. Maybe he said, but not yet. Because the story wasn't over. It was just getting started. Page 10. Reflection Lessons and Life Beyond the Courtroom. The story of Elijah Bennett and Rosa is more than a heartwarming tale of a boy who stood up in court. It's a parable for our time, a reminder that truth, when armed with love, can defeat power, prejudice, and broken systems. What began as a wrongful accusation against an elderly woman evolved into a quiet revolution, led not by an adult with influence, but by a child with nothing but a folder and a fire in his heart. Elijah didn't have a law degree. He didn't have political power. But he had what many systems fear the most: clarity, compassion, and conviction. What makes this story powerful is not the courtroom twist, but the emotional truth beneath it. Elijah was not fighting out of pride. He was fighting because he had already lost his parents and couldn't bear to lose the only family he had left. Rosa's heartbreak was not about being accused. It was about being unheard, unseen, and discarded after a lifetime of service. Calloway's downfall reminds us that those who build their careers on bias and shortcuts eventually face the consequences of their own arrogance. This story teaches us that justice is not a process, it's a principle. And sometimes it takes someone without legal training to remind the world of what fairness really means. Emotional takeaways. Truth is not loud, it's steady. Elijah never shouted. He never raised his voice. He asked questions. He pointed out what was obvious but unseen. He let facts, not fear, do the talking. Children see what adults forget. Adults often overlook what seems too small or too naive. But sometimes it's the smallest voices that carry the most unfiltered truth. Power doesn't protect you from being wrong. Calloway the prosecutor had experience, prestige, and a high conviction rate, but he lost everything because he didn't care to investigate fully. His failure wasn't in what he didn't know, but in what he chose not to learn. Social perspective. This story also shines a light on how systems are rigged against the vulnerable. Rosa was a poor black woman with no legal support, yet instantly assumed guilty. Elijah, a child, had to do the investigative work law enforcement failed to do. The evidence was always there, but those in charge didn't care to look. Too often, institutions demand proof from those least equipped to provide it. But when someone like Elijah steps up, it exposes just how much we depend on the silence of the unheard to keep injustice functioning. Final life lesson. Sometimes the system won't protect you, so you must prepare to protect yourself and others. Elijah didn't wait for someone to save his grandma. He learned, he asked, he studied, he stood. Even as a child, he understood this truth. Justice isn't given. It's claimed. So whether you're young, marginalized, overlooked, or underestimated, know this: you have more power than they think. Ask questions. Document truth. Speak when it matters. Even if your voice shakes, speak anyway. Because someone is listening. Because someone else is waiting for you to show them it's possible. And because one folder filled with facts and faith can change the world.